Well, good evening and welcome to our Lent Lecture for this week. My name is Reverend Gemma and I'm delighted to be introducing the Reverend Dr. Sarah Brush, who's going to be speaking to us today about being excited by creation. Sarah does an excellent job of introducing herself at the beginning of her lecture, so I won't repeat her. I'll just hand over to her now.
Hello, my name's Sarah Brush and I teach pastoral theology at Ripon College, Cuddesdon, where I taught a certain curate named Gemma. I'm going to be talking to you this evening about what excites me, and for me what excites me is creation. We're going to be thinking about that in a number of different ways, but I thought it would be really lovely if we started with getting out there in creation itself. So here is some footage I recorded a few weeks ago. When Gemma asked me if I think about doing one of these talks and said to me the theme was what excites me, I must admit that I found it quite difficult to be excited about anything during lockdown. The prospect of going out for another walk, watching another box set on the television, or baking another cake for just my husband and I to eat. But then I remembered the thing that would be exciting me very soon. That prospect of getting out into the garden, losing myself in the earth, planting things and watching them grow. And even in the winter, we've seen some of those signs of growth around. I'm sure many of you are probably much better gardeners or have much more experience of it than I do. Might even ponder some of the methods I might use when I'm doing these. And I am probably not the most successful of gardeners either, if I'm honest. But I'm a hopeful one. And there is an amazingly special thing that happens when you walk into the greenhouse and see that something has grown, that first sign of a little sprout coming out of the earth, and therefore I think it's worth planting in hope, even if at the moment I'm currently in lockdown like everybody else. By the time we watch this together, hopefully schools will have been back for a couple of weeks, and family life at home might have returned a bit to normal. As I said, I'm not a particularly good gardener. I'm at best an enthusiastic amateur. But that in many ways is why it makes me excited. If I don't manage to grow us enough food, it's not that we'll starve. We won't even go without those things that I've been trying to grow, because I can buy most of them in the supermarket or our local farm shop. Yet there is something really special about eating something that you have grown for yourself. If you've ever done it, you'll know that feeling of planting the seed and then later watching it grow and turning it into something to give you energy and delight. Yet more than simply eating what you've grown, there's something very vital about getting back to the earth. Because of course, it's where we all come from. It's about reconnecting with our origins. In the very beginning of our scriptures, we hear about the God of creation, who brings forth green plants and fruit-bearing trees, who creates animals, birds and fish, and who creates human beings to care for them all. And it's only in digging deep into the original text of that passage that we really understand what God was doing there. God forms Adam from the Adamah. It's a passage that isn't often translated that way, but often that detail is given in the footnote to the translation. The Hebrew word for earth, Adamah, is also the root of that first being created from the Adamah, for Adam. Now we probably only really think about this idea at Ash Wednesday or at funerals, when we're reminded that we are dust and to dust we shall return. That can sound like a very daunting prospect, but how much richer a sense we have if we think of it as we are Adam and to the Adamah we will return. If we can reconnect properly to the earth, we can see ourselves as part of the cycle of life, part of the creation which grows and changes, which dies back and is reborn. We can begin then to see creation and to see ourselves as God sees us. I think the funny thing about growing things at home is almost all of the things we grow, the things we grow to eat, end up probably being more expensive than what we would buy in the shops. But they're worth so much more. And they're a reminder to us that God's economy doesn't have a pound sign on it. If you remember the parable of the sower, God is epitomised as the sower that strews the seed wherever it will go, some landing in rich earth like this, others falling on rocky or thorny ground. but the sower nonetheless sows liberally, overflowing with generosity. There is a risk in growing. And for the little seeds that have gone in there is dying before there is growing. Only from the death of that seed will come the life that will hopefully be some really great big tomatoes. Had some of these last year and they were delicious. But unless a grain of wheat shall fall upon the earth and die, it remains but a single grain. Planting something I was given quite a long time ago now, and only recently found it. It's an olive seed given out at Greenbelt a few years ago when we were looking at Palestine. Quite a long while ago really, but it's never too late for new hope. Always rather been taken by the scriptures that have growing things in them, and of course, unfortunately for us, a lot of the things that grow really well where Jesus lived and where the people of Israel lived are not necessarily native to here. And even with global warming, we're still not quite Mediterranean, Middle Eastern temperatures, but I'm hoping I might get an olive tree one day. A neighbour has a fig tree, which gave me a whole new insight into one of those stories from Scripture about Jesus cursing the fig tree. Jesus says when he sees a tree that has no figs on it, and the author of the Gospel says, even though it was not the time for figs, Jesus then curses the tree and says, you will never grow fruit again. But having looked after my neighbour's figs whilst they were away, I've learnt something about fig trees that I hadn't known before, which is that the fruit of next year grows a year early as tiny little smaller, sort of thumb-sized figs, whilst the other figs are ripe. So when Jesus saw that fig tree with no figs on at all, he was right. That fig tree wasn't going to grow anymore because there wasn't the expectation of next year's fruit. I sometimes wonder whether when the disciples heard him telling the tree he wasn't going to bear any more fruit, they thought it was an order, when he perhaps meant it more as an observation. It does make me wonder.
As God the Son, Jesus was able to see that fig tree in a way different to the way his disciples viewed it. He was more connected to creation. He could see that fig tree in its past, its present, and its future. And if we engage with nature, if we root ourselves deep within it, we too can make those connections more readily. Poet and theologian John Moffat writes about this in his poem To Look at Anything, and I'm going to read that for you now. To look at anything, you must look at it long. To look at this green and say, "I have seen spring in these woods," will not do. You must be the thing you see. You must be the dark snakes of stems and ferny plumes of leaves. You must enter into the small silences between the leaves. You must take your time and touch the very place they issue from. Now I have to be quite careful. Like I said, I get quite enthusiastic about planting things. And it's that first not freezing cold day, as I say, the first possible day of spring. But still, some things will plant this season and some won't. For some, this is just the right time to grow. For others, they need to wait before they can begin to grow. If I planted them now, it would be too cold, and the seed, instead of dying and bringing new life, might just rot away within the soil. And for us too, as Christians and as human beings, there's a right time for us to grow. A good time, a better time, a time that is our season of growth. And I'm hedging my bets here as well as the broad beans from my own grown. I've got some shop bought beans, because broad beans are one of my favourites, and I like to make sure I've got enough.
In a meteorological sense at the moment, we're just in the beginnings of spring. And that calls to mind for me a poem from Philip Larkin called The Trees. The trees are coming into leaf, like something almost being said. The recent buds relax and spread. Their greenness is a kind of grief. Is it that they are born again and we grow old? No, they die too. Their yearly trick of looking new is written down in rings of grain. Yet still these unresting castles thresh in full-grown thickness every May. Last year is dead, they seem to say. Begin afresh, afresh, afresh.
As a church, we can sometimes become obsessed with growing. Obsessed with growing rather than with creation itself. And when we think about growing, we think about more people, more giving, more mission, more action, more doing. It can often mean focusing on the young rather than those of all ages. And though it's true that there can be growth at all stages of life, there also comes a time when life begins to be slower, when there's less growth, when there's less that's new, and as the seasons turn, when the time to be with God approaches. When our growing must be growing into something completely different. And I think in those, particularly in the elderly as they near death, they might appear sometimes to us as not growing at all, as reducing, as diminishing. And that's simply because they are growing into something that we're not accustomed to. They're growing into God. They're growing into something for the kingdom. And to grow into something for the kingdom It might mean needing to slow down, to give up rather than to produce and to multiply, to become again that seed that must die in order to grow into something new, in order to be reborn. And that Easter story to which we now look, when Jesus took the first step for us of dying to be born again into a new life, calling us all, promising us that he goes to prepare a place for us, that he is the way, the truth and the life. And in that passage, when Thomas doesn't know the way, he reassures his disciples saying, I am the way, reassuring them that they know him already, so they know the way. This past year has seen many come to that time of dying, many of them before the time that we might think was right. For some of us, that loss will have been close. For some, it will have just been observed on the news as numbers rose. And even as the signs of new hope in the form of vaccines came around, and we reached that huge figure of 1 million people in the world having died, or 100,000 people in this country. Each one of those lives God knew about. Each one of those God cared about. And each one of us God cares about too. I don't know where you are in your phase of growing, whether you're feeling incredibly fruitful. Perhaps you've had a new lease of life in this lockdown, for either being furloughed and finding something new to do, or finding there's so much more to do in a role that's changed. Whether you're feeling like you're in furlough, that there's nothing much going on, perhaps some of you have lost jobs and not been able to find new jobs. Some of you may have felt rather lost without the work that you're accustomed to, whether paid or voluntary. Some of you might feel it's far too busy, too much going on, too much homeschooling, too much changing the way we do things, too much being stuck at home, too much of these four walls that surround us. Jesus said to his disciples, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, then you have the power to make things grow and change. The mustard seed, the smallest of all seeds, that grows into a great tree in which birds can find a nest. It's a tree we don't have in this country, the mustard tree. It's much more common in Africa and the Middle East, where Jesus and his disciples lived. It's not the seed that we make into mustard and put in our sandwiches. No, the tree is very tall, and the seed is very small indeed. Even if the hope in you has shrunk to be small like that mustard seed, we believe in a God of creation, a God of growing, a God who sees that small thing and from that can grow a great thing for the benefit not just of that tree, but for others. Wherever you might be in your stage of growth, I pray that you may see the mustard seed of faith that is within you. May you nurture it, and may you help it grow. To draw our time together to a close, I'd like to share with you how creation has influenced some of my research into theology and some of the stuff that I teach to some of our students here about growing and how faith grows in reflecting on our connection with nature. So what I'm going to present to you is a faith development model which I'm working on for publication, based upon the idea that each of us has a tree that is our faith growing within us. My metaphor is based on the idea that within our faith lives there are two movements in the way that we grow and develop. That there is a linear through time, progressing forwards, but that also there's a circular seasonality about the way that our faith grows. To represent this, I use the image of a tree growing from seed and experiencing the seasons of the year. Imagine a person's faith as a tree grown from seed. Faith develops from seed to seedling, from seedling to sapling, from sapling to young tree, from young tree to mature tree, and from mature tree to totem. Throughout all this, another cycle is happening, the changing seasons of each year. Untended, a seed can lie underground, unseen and unsprouting for years. To begin growing and in early growth, it requires nurture and development. It literally feeds off what is outside, and yet this all happens below ground, unseen, as the fallen leaves and branches of other trees, some long dead, provide warmth and nutrients. When the seed starts to grow, it changes radically and rapidly, reaching down towards the dark earth, and conversely up towards the light. Growth becomes visible when a seed becomes a seedling. As a seedling, nurture is still important. Young leaves are delicate, and leaves reaching out to the light, or roots seeking a firm foundation, if those are stripped off through damage, the main stalk is unable to grow. The seedling looks very different to the seed, and yet still does not always look very much like the fully grown tree. In the wild, a seedling will grow into a sapling if the trees around allow sufficient light to shine through their branches. Wherever saplings grow, there must be space for them to grow up beside the other trees. A bigger tree too close by and encroaching can cause a sapling to grow in strange ways. This sapling stage can be a time when much growth happens, and when there can be damage from storms to still young branches. As a sapling, branches appear and individuality begins to show. Sometimes these branches will be lost or damaged, yet the shadow of these lost or damaged branches will be visible in the fully matured tree. Some saplings put so much energy into growing more than one strong upward branch that other branches suffer later. The sapling then ends up weakened and not fulfilling all its possibilities. So helpful training and even some trimming of overextending branches can promote good growth. A sapling grown in a safe pot might need careful transplanting into more extensive and free ground to grow fully. And when grown in controlled conditions, a sapling can sometimes be supported by another piece of wood. This can seem helpful, but often has unintended outcomes. there comes a point when the support for the sapling must be taken away, because it becomes something which hinders the sapling becoming a young tree. Trees don't grow in a single year. They're subject to the seasons. Growth is not only linear, but comes in cycles. The seed, seedling and sapling experience the seasons. Only the warmth of the earth, the rains of spring, can enable the seed to sprout, and the seedling, no matter how small, will shed its leaves in the autumn. The sapling will blossom in spring and may fruit, even if fruits are not fully formed, or the branches that they're growing on not strong enough to hold them. Support is needed to keep the sapling through the autumn and winter, as these changing times can be too much, when there's not enough light, and when the dark may seem to go on forever. Saplings can produce disappointing fruits. For a young tree, some now for the first time without special support, the seasons suddenly become more apparent. Bare branches of winter give way to new growth in spring blossom, in summer fruiting. Autumn leaf loss leads again to bare branches, but branches now changed since the previous winter, matured through the successive seasons. It's therefore the young tree where the seasons really begin to tell. These are the things that make the difference to the young tree, and the young tree moves with them, though still can find that some changing seasons can be confusing. Winter is the time for bare branches, focusing on the basics, consolidating or dying back in some parts. A time when the light seems less bright, and the young tree must rely on not the light, but what it can draw from beneath through its roots. The young tree learns that spring is when new things begin, and growth from older branches produces the possibility of new branches in new directions. Then the foundations for fruits to come are seen in the blossom. Summer is the time for flourishing, a time of abundant light. Autumn is the time for the tree to show its fruitfulness, as it shows the results of its flourishing, to offer up its fruits and prepare for the times when there is less light, a time to store up before it's winter again, the time for those new branches from that previous spring to consolidate themselves once again. A young tree will gradually mature, its strongest branches determining how the tree grows. It is still vulnerable, yet by this vulnerability also more able to move with the storms of life, while strong enough to endure them. Even if a tree loses some branches, it can continue to grow towards the light and in building good solid roots. And a young tree is still versatile enough to be moved to new soil and to continue to grow, to pick up its roots and re-establish somewhere new. The mature tree has solid core branches, established when the tree was a sapling and a young tree, and these form the basic nature of the tree and the direction it grows. No slight storm can shake the core of a mature tree, though younger branches can move or even break away. The mature tree is less able to change. A great storm or some other external force can make big changes to the tree, yet without destroying it, as the roots are more fixed and established. Yet growth in new places, perhaps unexpected places, is still possible. Changing where a mature tree is planted is possible, but can have detrimental effects. Not done carefully, the tree can fail to survive. For the mature tree, the seasons are familiar. There's an expectation that there'll be times when there's not much light and time for fruitfulness. Mature trees can focus their growth and allow light to fall through their branches onto younger trees below, offering their leaves and even their lost branches as sources of nutrients to other growing trees. Some trees, as they get older, require additional support to hold up great branches which might otherwise fall or break. Eventually, all trees become older. Some mature trees will become great totems, still standing but no longer producing new growth. Their main trunk and branches formed so well over the years can still stand despite a lack of growth. They can draw on the resources of their deep roots and present to the world a powerful image of what it means to be a great tree. Even a hollowed out tree can still show what a great tree it had been before and offer a sign of what trees look like. Trees grow not just in one season, but throughout the dark of winter, the burgeoning of spring, the flourishing of summer, and the fruitfulness of autumn. A mature tree endures such seasons with familiarity and with much greater ease, but even these can be affected by too cold a winter or too hot a summer. Trees grow both progressively and cyclically. A tree in one spring is not the same tree as the tree in the next spring. Spring is familiar, but the tree itself has changed. Of course, also the particular nature of trees is different. Oaks and ashes and beeches grow in different shapes and sizes. Yet as seedlings they may look familiar, even still as saplings. But as they mature, their shape becomes more apparent. Similarly, a great totem, losing some of its distinctive shape and size, can become more like those totems of other types of tree, with the distinctiveness lost, just as it was with the seedling and the sapling. And the ground in which the trees are planted is made up of the roots of trees planted nearby, and the richness left by trees gone long before. I wonder what your relationship to creation is like. Are you often outdoors for work, or tending your garden, or going for a walk? Do you enjoy it by looking out of your window? Perhaps there are some familiar features to the creation that you particularly enjoy. And how do you respond to Scripture when it talks about creation? We explored a few passages, but are there other passages that you particularly find help you connect to God and help you understand what God is like? How does that idea of the cycle of life in creation make you feel? Particularly our part in it, and the fact that each of us will die before we are reborn. And what about that metaphor of your faith and how it grows? What season is your faith in, and how mature do you think your tree is? Where have you been planted? Where have you found nourishment from other trees, perhaps those alongside you or those that are long past? Thank you for joining me this evening. I look forward to discussing these questions and any others which you might want to bring up. All these things that might grow from our engagement with creation. Before we come to our time of questions, let's pray together. A prayer from Pope Francis in his great document about creation, Laudato Si. All-powerful God, you are present in the universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with your peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain, at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. Amen.
Well, a huge thanks to Sarah for that incredible lecture. So much to think about and ponder about, and really encouraged me to get outside and start planting things, which is, is unusual for me. So we're really grateful for Sarah, and we're delighted that she's going to be joining us at 9 p.m. this evening, which is the 23rd of March, to do a Q&A if anybody would like to join us. Also, just a brief reminder that you are able to give to the parish if you'd like to. The details for both the Zoom link and how to give will be available immediately after this lecture. And finally, just to say that next week we'll be joined by our own Canon John Edwards. He'll be talking to us about being excited by stained glass.